The fog hung heavy over St. George Street, a shroud of gray so thick it swallowed the cobblestones and muffled the world into an eerie hush. 6 massive German shepherds burst through the mist, their paws pounding in unison, a thunderous rhythm that shook the dawn. At their center, Lily Harper, a fragile wisp of a girl no more than 6, stumbled as a delivery truck screeched around the corner, its headlights slashing through the gloom. The dogs, dark-eyed sentinels, swung into a protective arc, Titan's growl rumbling like a storm as he lunged to block her. From the roaring metal beast, her small hand trembled on his fur, her breath a sharp gasp in the damp air. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The truck driver slammed on his brakes, tires squealing against the wet pavement, the sound a jagged tear in the stillness of St. Augustine's historic district. He leaned out the window, his face a mask of shock and irritation, shouting something about reckless kids and wild animals. But Lily didn't hear him. Her world narrowed to the warmth of Titan's flank pressed against her side, the steady rise and fall of his breathing anchoring her, as the other 5 dogs, Rosie, Jasper, Daisy, Storm, and Finn, formed a living wall around her. The fog curled around them, softening their edges, making them appear as phantoms summoned from some ancient tale. To the gathering onlookers, it was a sight both mesmerizing and unnerving. A tiny girl commanding a pack of beasts with no leashes, no harnesses, just the faintest flick of her wrist, or a whispered word, lost to the wind. Dorothy Evans stood at her upstairs window. Venetian blinds parted just enough to frame her sharp, assessing gaze. The old Victorian home she'd lived in for 40 years creaked under the weight of the morning damp, its peeling paint a testament to time's slow march. At 72, Dorothy carried the authority of her decades as an elementary school principal, her silver hair pulled tight into a bun, her lips pursed in disapproval. Something's not right about that, she muttered to herself, her voice low and edged with suspicion. No child that small could control these monsters naturally. Mark my words, there's trouble brewing in that house. She let the blind snap shut, the sound a punctuation to her growing unease, though she couldn't yet name the source of it. Below, the crowd swelled. Shopkeepers pausing with keys in hand, tourists fumbling for their phones, drawn to the improbable procession like moths to a flame. Lily moved forward again, her red sneakers scuffing the cobblestones, barely visible beneath the forest of canine legs. She was a slip of a thing, her pale face framed by a tangle of dark hair that fell past her shoulders, her eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on some point beyond the fog. She didn't acknowledge the stares or the murmurs, didn't flinch at the truck's lingering exhaust. To her, the world beyond her dogs was a distant hum, a shadow she'd learned to tune out. Titan, the largest of the pack at nearly 90 pounds, took point position, his ears swiveling like radar, alert to every rustle and breath. Rosie flanked her left, Jasper her right, while Daisy, Storm, and Finn fanned out behind, their movements so synchronized they seemed to share a single mind. It was a dance of muscle and instinct, choreographed by a child who spoke no words to the humans gaping at her. Frank Sullivan, owner of Sullivan's Coffee Shack 2 blocks down, paused mid-sweep of his storefront, broom forgotten in his hands. His weathered face, lined from years under the Florida sun, broke into a grin. "Would you look at that?" he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying a mix of awe and amusement. "Those dogs mind that little girl better than my grandkids mind me." He shook his head, setting the broom against the wall as he watched Lily guide her pack past the pastel facades of St. Augustine's oldest street. He'd seen a lot in his 68 years, hurricanes, tourist invasions, even the occasional alligator wandering too far from the marshes, but nothing quite like this. Across the street, Margaret Brooks clutched her purse tighter, her gray curls bouncing as she hurried to cross before Lily's procession reached her. Her poodle, Muffin, had once yelped and bolted at the sight of Jasper's towering form, and though no harm had come of it, the memory lingered like a splinter in her mind. "It's unnatural," she'd told Dorothy over tea the day before, her voice trembling with the certainty of someone who'd lived long enough to fear the unknown. "A child shouldn't have that kind of power over creatures like those." Dorothy had nodded then, her own suspicions finding fertile ground in Margaret's unease, though she kept her deeper thoughts to herself. Now, watching from her window, she felt those suspicions harden into something sharper, something that demanded action. Lily's path took her past the Castillo de San Marcos, the ancient fort looming through the fog like a sentinel of the past. The salty tang of the Matanzas Bay drifted inland, mingling with the damp earthiness of the morning, a scent that had woven itself into the fabric of St. Augustine over centuries. She didn't pause to admire the fort's weathered coquina walls, or the tourists already gathering at its gates. Her focus was singular, her small hand resting lightly on Titan's back as they turned onto Cathedral Place, the dogs adjusting their formation with a precision that bordered on uncanny. A soft whistle escaped her lips, so faint it might have been the wind, and Jasper shifted to close a gap, his amber eyes flicking toward her as if awaiting further instruction. To those who didn't know her story, Lily Harper was an enigma, a quiet specter trailing shadows far larger than herself. But the truth lay buried beneath her silence, a wound too raw to voice. 2 years ago, her world had shattered on a rain-slicked road, leaving her an orphan at 4. Henry and Evelyn Harper, her grandparents, had taken her in, their modest home near the beach a refuge for both the child and the 6 dogs her parents had trained. Jack and Clara Harper had been legends in their field, their work with police departments across Florida a source of pride for the family. Now, those dogs were all Lily had left of them, and she clung to them with a ferocity that belied her fragile frame. Henry, at 74, moved slower these days, his heart a ticking clock he refused to acknowledge. Evelyn, 2 years younger, bore the weight of arthritis in her swollen hands, her once steady grip faltering as she tried to manage the pack. They'd seen Lily's gift early, how at 3 she'd calmed a snarling rescue dog with a touch, her tiny fingers threading through its fur as if threading a needle through cloth. Jack had laughed then, calling her his little whisperer. Clara had smiled, her eyes bright with pride. That gift had saved Lily. When words failed her, when the crash stole her voice, had left her adrift in a sea of grief. The fog began to lift as Lily reached the end of St. George Street, the sun's first rays piercing the gray, to paint the town in soft gold. She paused at a crosswalk, the dogs fanning out around her in a protective semicircle, their attentiveness unwavering. A young mother, pushing a stroller, hesitated, then smiled tentatively, offering a small wave Lily didn't return. Her focus remained on Titan, on the steady pulse of his presence beneath her hand. The crowd thinned as shops opened, the spectacle fading into the rhythm of another day, But Dorothy's words lingered in the air, a quiet promise of trouble yet to come. Somewhere in the Harper home, Henry stirred awake, his breath uneven as he reached for his pills. Evelyn shuffled to the kitchen, her joints protesting, whispering a prayer that the dogs would keep Lily safe where they could not. And in the heart of St. Augustine, a storm was brewing, not of wind or rain, but of hearts and minds, poised to clash over a girl and her shadows. What secrets drove her silence? What power bound her to those beasts? The answers lay ahead, waiting to unfold. The rain came down in sheets that October night in 2019, a relentless drumming that turned the coastal road outside St. Augustine into a river of black glass. Jack Harper gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as Clara turned to check on 4-year-old Lily strapped in the back seat. The German shepherds, Titan, Rosie, Jasper, Daisy, Storm, and Finn were kenneled at home, their absence a rare void in the family's tight orbit. Headlights flared through the windshield, too close, too fast. A pickup truck barreled through the red light, its horn a useless wail swallowed by the storm. Metal screamed against metal, glass shattered, and in an instant the world Lily knew dissolved into darkness. She didn't scream, not then, not after. Her voice stolen by the wreckage that claimed her parents. The paramedics found her curled on the roadside, rain plastering her dark hair to her face, her small body trembling but unharmed. How she'd escaped the twisted remains of the car, no one could say. Only that she'd been found clutching a soaked stuffed dog, her eyes wide and unseeing. Jack and Clara Harper, renowned trainers whose dogs had sniffed out missing hikers and tracked fugitives for Florida's police departments, were gone. The news rippled through St. Augustine like a stone dropped in still water, leaving grief and disbelief in its wake. Henry and Evelyn Harper, Jack's parents, arrived at the hospital, their faces etched with a pain too deep for words. Henry, 72 then, leaned heavily on his cane, his heart already fragile. Evelyn, 2 years younger, clutched her coat against the chill, her hands swollen from arthritis, but steady as she reached for her granddaughter. They brought Lily home to their weathered house near Villano Beach, a salt-stained relic of cedar and shingles that creaked with every gust off the Atlantic. The 6 German shepherds waited there, kenneled in the backyard, their howls rising into the night as if mourning the loss they sensed. Henry unlatched the gates, and the dogs surged forward, circling Lily with a quiet intensity that broke Evelyn's heart. Titan pressed his massive head against her chest. Rosie nosed her hand, and the others formed a protective ring, their dark coats glistening with rain. Lily didn't speak, not to her grandparents, not to the doctors who came later, just sank to her knees among the dogs, her fingers threading through their fur as if searching for something lost. Days turned to weeks, and the silence grew. Selective mutism, the specialists called it, a trauma response that locked her voice away from humans. She'd sit for hours on the sagging porch, the dog sprawled around her, her eyes tracing the horizon where the ocean met the sky. Henry and Evelyn watched, helpless, as she retreated into a world they couldn't reach. "She's still in there," Evelyn whispered one night, her voice trembling as she stirred a pot of soup Henry couldn't eat. "But it's like she only hears them now." Henry nodded, his breath uneven, the weight of his son's death pressing on his chest like a stone. The dogs became her tether, their presence a lifeline when words failed her. Lily had always been special with them. At 3, she'd toddled into the training yard where Jack worked a snarling rescue dog no one else could handle. Clara had gasped, reaching to pull her back. but Lily stretched out a tiny hand, her touch soft as a feather. The dog stilled, its growls fading to whimpers, and Jack had laughed, a deep, proud sound. "Our little whisperer," he'd called her, ruffling her hair. Clara's eyes had shone, her smile warm as she scribbled notes in their training journals. That gift, once a source of joy, now held Lily together when everything else fell apart. She'd whisper to the dogs, soft, breathy sounds no one else could decipher, and they'd respond, their ears twitching, their bodies shifting to her will. Henry and Evelyn struggled to keep up. At 74 now, Henry's heart condition made every step a gamble. He'd shuffle to the yard to feed the dogs, his hands shaking as he hefted the bags of kibble. Evelyn's arthritis turned simple tasks into battles, clipping leashes, brushing coats, walking the pack, but she refused to let go. The dogs were Jack and Clara's legacy, their last gift to Lily, and parting with them felt like severing the final thread to their son and daughter-in-law. Their fixed income stretched thin, barely covering food for 6 ravenous shepherds in Lily's therapy sessions, which yielded little beyond polite shrugs from doctors. "She needs them," Evelyn told Henry one evening, her voice firm despite the ache in her joints. "More than she needs us, maybe." The house itself seemed to mourn. Paint peeled from the walls, the roof leaked in heavy rains, and the porch sagged under the weight of time and neglect. But within its worn embrace, a quiet rhythm emerged. Lily would rise at dawn, her red sneakers silent on the floorboards, and slip outside to the dogs. Titan would nudge her awake if she lingered too long, his nose cold against her cheek. She'd sit cross-legged in the yard, the pack arrayed around her, and run through commands she'd memorized from watching her parents. Sit, stay, circle. Her hands moving in subtle arcs, they obeyed without hesitation. It was a language of trust, forged in loss, and it kept her afloat when the nightmares came, dark echoes of rain and fire she couldn't escape. The community knew the Harper's story, whispered it over coffee at Sullivan's or during Sunday services at the cathedral basilica. Some left casseroles on the porch, others offered prayers, but few ventured closer. The dogs, with their size and intensity, intimidated even the well-meaning. Frank Sullivan had stopped by once, his gruff kindness met with Evelyn's tired smile and Lily's blank stare. "She's a tough little thing," he'd said, tipping you at before leaving. But toughness couldn't erase the void, and as the month turned to years, Lily's silence became a fixture, as much a part of St. Augustine as the fort or the tides. Dorothy Evans, from her perch on St. George Street, had heard the tale too. She'd taught Jack in 3rd grade, remembered his bright grin and restless energy, and felt a pang when the news broke. But pity didn't soften her now. Watching Lily that foggy morning, the dogs moving like shadows at her command, Dorothy saw not a grieving child, but a puzzle, something unnatural, something that defied the order she'd spent a lifetime enforcing. She didn't know yet what drove her unease, but it gnawed at her. A splinter she couldn't ignore. As the sun climbed higher that day, burning off the fog, Lily led her pack back to the beachside house. Henry watched from the window, his breath fogging the glass, and Evelyn joined him, her hand resting on his arm. "She's all we've got left," he rasped, his voice thick. Evelyn nodded, her eyes on the girl who'd once giggled at Jack's silly faces, now a ghost tethered to 6 loyal shadows. The past echoed in her silence, but the future loomed uncertain, a thread waiting to unravel. Lily stood at the edge of the Villano beach yard, the dawn light painting the dunes, in hues of pink and gold. The 6 German shepherds gathered around her, their coats damp with dew, their eyes locked on her small form. She adjusted the leashes clipped to her belt, a precaution Evelyn insisted on after a neighbor's complaint, then stepped forward, her red sneakers crunching on the sandy path. Titan took point, his massive frame cutting through the morning air, while Rosie and Jasper flanked her sides, Daisy, Storm, and Finn fanning out behind. They moved as one, a disciplined unit, and as they reached the cobblestones of St. George Street, the town began to stir, drawn to the quiet spectacle of a child and her shadows. The first time Lily walked them alone, cars slowed to a crawl, drivers craning their necks to see. Tourists near the Castillo de San Marcos snapped photos, their voices a buzz of wonder and disbelief. "Is that a kid?" one asked, fumbling with his phone. "Those dogs are huge." Frank Sullivan, sweeping the sidewalk outside his coffee shop, paused to watch, a grin tugging at his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, setting out a water bowl as the pack passed. He'd taken to doing that lately, a small gesture of support for the girl who'd become a fixture in St. Augustine's morning rhythm. The dogs lapped at it briefly, Titan glancing back at Lily as if awaiting her nod, then resumed their march. She kept to the side streets at first, weaving past the pastel homes and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. Her confidence grew with each step, her hands steady as she guided them with flicks of her wrists and soft whistles that blended with the breeze. By the 3rd week, she'd claimed St. George Street as her route, the heart of the historic district where shops opened early and the air smelled of salt and coffee. The dogs adjusted seamlessly, 90 pounds of muscle bending to the will of a 6-year-old whose silence spoke louder than words. Titan led with an air of command, his ears swiveling at every sound, while Rosie's gentle nudge kept Lily centered, a motherly instinct honed by years at Clara's side. Officer Tom Rivera followed at a distance that first month, his patrol car idling as he observed. A 20-year veteran, he'd worked with K-9 units across Florida, and recognized discipline when he saw it. "Never seen anything like it," he told his partner over the radio, his voice tinged with respect. "She's got them tighter than our best handlers." He'd started as a precaution, prompted by a call from Margaret Brooks about unleashed monsters, but now he stayed out of curiosity, marveling at the precision of Lily's control. When she paused at a crosswalk, the dogs formed a semicircle, their bodies a shield against the world, and Tom scribbled a note. "No threat here. Just a kid and her dogs." Dorothy Evans saw it differently. From her window she timed Lily's walks, 45 minutes each morning, no adult in sight. She jotted it down in a spiral notebook, her handwriting sharp and deliberate, the same she'd used to grade papers decades ago. "Where are her grandparents?" she demanded of her husband Carl, who sat with his crossword, long accustomed to her rhetorical storms. Those dogs could turn on her or someone else in a heartbeat. It's negligence, plain and simple. Carl sighed, his pen hovering over 7 down, but said nothing. Dorothy's unease wasn't just about safety. It was something deeper. A thread of discomfort she couldn't yet unravel, tied to memories she kept buried. Margaret Brooks fueled the fire. Over tea at Dorothy's, she'd recounted Muffin's panic at Jasper's shadow, her voice rising with each retelling. "I don't care if they didn't touch him," she'd said, her hands trembling around her cup. "They're too big, too wild for a child to handle." Dorothy nodded, her mind ticking like a clock wound too tight. She'd seen Lily that morning, the truck incident still fresh, Titan's growl echoing in her ears. It wasn't natural, she thought, not the way a child should be. She began whispering to neighbors, planting seeds of doubt that sprouted in quiet corners of St. Augustine. Lily felt the stares, though she didn't meet them. Her world was the dogs, their steady breaths, their warmth against her legs, their trust in her commands. She didn't hear Frank's gruff praise or Margaret's muttered fears. She moved through the town like a ghost, her red sneakers a splash of color against the gray cobblestones, her silence a wall no one could breach. When a tourist asked for a photo, she didn't respond, her eyes on Titan as he shifted to block the stranger's path. The man backed off, laughing nervously, and Lily pressed on, the pack tightening around her as if sensing her unease. Back at the beachside house, Henry and Evelyn watched her return each day, their worry etched in the lines of their faces. Henry's heart pills sat on the kitchen counter, a daily reminder of his fragility. Evelyn's hands ached as she kneaded dough for bread they couldn't afford to buy, her thoughts on Lily's growing isolation. She's out there alone too much, Henry rasped one morning, his voice rough with fatigue. Evelyn nodded, her eyes on the yard where Lily sat with the dogs, her small form swallowed by their shadows. "But they keep her safe," she said, a quiet conviction in her tone. Jack and Clara knew what they were doing. The town's rhythm shifted with Lily's marches. Shopkeepers set their watches by her. Tourists dubbed her the Dog Girl. And a quiet divide began to form. Frank left bones from the butcher outside his shop, a gift for the pack, while Margaret crossed the street to avoid them. Her purse clutched like a shield. Dorothy's notebook filled with observations, times, routes, the occasional growl, and her resolve hardened. She didn't know yet what she'd do, but the sight of Lily, dwarfed yet commanding, stirred something restless in her soul. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the fog, Lily paused at the edge of Cathedral Place, the dogs fanning out around her. A gull cried overhead, its call sharp against the hum of waking saint, Augustine. She rested a hand on Titan's head, her fingers tracing the ridge of his skull, and for a moment her lips moved, a whisper too soft to hear, a secret shared only with her shadows. The town watched, divided, curious, and uneasy, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the horizon. The wind off Matanzas Bay carried a sharp edge that morning, rattling the shutters of Dorothy Evans' Victorian home as she set a tray of tea and scones on the wraparound porch. A small group gathered, Margaret Brooks, clutching her scarf against the breeze, and 3 other women from the church auxiliary, their faces pinched with concern. Dorothy stood at the railing, her silver bun glinting in the weak sunlight, her voice cutting through the rustle of leaves. 45 minutes every morning, unsupervised, she said, tapping her notebook with a manicured nail. Those dogs could turn on her, or anyone, in an instant. It's negligence, plain and simple. The women nodded, their murmurs rising like the wind itself, a chorus of doubt seeded by Dorothy's unwavering certainty. Margaret leaned forward, her gray curls trembling as she spoke. "My muffin still shakes when we pass that house. One of those beasts, Jasper, I think, lunged at him last spring. No contact, mind you, but the intent was there." Her voice quivered, amplifying a memory. Dorothy had heard a dozen times, each retelling more vivid than the last. The others chimed in. Ellen from the library recalled a growl at a tourist. Ruth from the garden club mentioned a near tangle with a stroller. None had proof, only impressions, but Dorothy wove them into a tapestry of danger, her eyes narrowing as she pictured Lily Harper marching her pack down St. George Street that very dawn. Titan's growl from the truck incident still echoing in her mind. Inside, Carl Evans sat with his crossword, the pencil idle in his hand. At 75, he'd learned to let Dorothy's crusades run their course, her words washing over him like the tide. "Where are her grandparents?" she demanded, turning to him as if he'd answer. He didn't, his silence a fortress built over 46 years of marriage. Dorothy huffed, returning to her guests. "Henry and Evelyn are too old to manage that child, let alone 6 wild animals. Someone has to step in." The wind carried her conviction beyond the porch, planting seeds in the fertile soil of Saint. Augustine's gossip network, seeds that would soon sprout into something far larger than she intended. Across town, Lily moved through her morning ritual, oblivious to the storm brewing in Dorothy's parlor. Her red sneakers scuffed the cobblestones as she led the dogs past the pastel storefronts, their formation tight and flawless. Titan strode ahead, his ears swiveling at the clatter of a shop shutter. Rosie brushed her side, a steady presence. The crowd had grown accustomed to her now, some waving, others stepping back, but Lily's focus remained on the pack, her world, her shield. She didn't hear the whispers trailing her, didn't see Margaret cross the street with a muttered prayer, her purse clutched like a talisman. The dogs sensed her tension, though. Jasper's head tilted toward her, Finn's pace quickened, and they tightened their circle, a living barrier against the eyes boring into her back. Frank Sullivan watched from his coffee shop, a bone-shaped treat in hand for the pack. "Mornin', Lily," he called, his gruff voice softened by habit. She didn't respond, her eyes on Titan as he paused to sniff the air, but Frank didn't mind. He'd seen her grow bolder these weeks, her route stretching from the quiet lanes near Villano Beach to the bustle of St. George Street. He set the treat down and Daisy snatched it with a wag of her tail, earning a rare flicker of a smile from Lily. A ghost of the child she'd been before the crash. Frank chuckled, turning back to his broom, but the warmth faded as he caught Margaret's glare from across the street. Her lips pursed in disapproval. Officer Tom Rivera trailed her that day, his patrol car a discreet shadow. He'd written off Margaret's complaints as nerves, but Dorothy's tea hours had reached his precinct. Murmurs of public safety filtering through the radio chatter. He watched Lily pause at a crosswalk, the dogs fanning out in their protective semicircle, and marveled again at their discipline. "Better than our canines," he muttered, jotting a note in his log. He'd started escorting her unofficially, a buffer between her and the growing unease, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, something Dorothy's sharp tongue was stirring to life. Back at the beachside house, Henry Harper sat in his armchair, his breath shallow as he swallowed a pill. The morning paper lay unread, his eyes on the window where Lily had disappeared into the dawn. Evelyn shuffled in from the kitchen, her hands swollen as she carried a mug of tea she'd brewed more for comfort than taste. "She's out there too long," Henry rasped, his voice thick with worry. Evelyn set the mug down, her gaze following his. "She's safe with them," she said, though doubt crept into her tone. The dogs were Jack and Clara's legacy, but their energy outpaced the couple's fading strength. Henry's heart fluttered, a warning he ignored, and Evelyn's joints ached, a silent plea for rest they couldn't afford. Dorothy's tea hour stretched into noon, the women dispersing with promises to keep an eye out. She stayed on the porch, her notebook open, her mind racing. She'd taught Jack Harper decades ago, remembered his restless spirit, his grin that lit up her classroom. His death had shaken her, but seeing Lily now, silent, commanding those beasts, stirred something else. It wasn't just pity or fear, it was a gnawing sense of wrongness, a thread tied to a past she wouldn't name. She closed the notebook, her resolve hardening. If no one else will act, she whispered to the wind, I will. The day wore on, the breeze carrying whispers of doubt through St. Augustine. Lily returned home, the dogs sprawling in the yard as she sat among them, her fingers tracing Titan's fur. She didn't know the eyes watching her, didn't hear the words gathering like storm clouds. But the dogs did. Rosie's ears twitched, Storm's head lifted, and they pressed closer, their loyalty a shield against the gathering tempest. The attic of the Harper house smelled of dust and memory, its slanted ceiling trapping the heat of a late September afternoon. Lily climbed the creaking stairs, her red sneakers silent on the worn wood, drawn by a pull she couldn't name. The dogs waited below, Titan's low whine echoing up as she pushed open a trunk tucked beneath the eaves. Inside lay her parents' training journals, leather-bound, edges frayed, pages filled with Jack's bold scrawl and Clara's precise notes. She traced the words, her small fingers trembling, and the past flooded back. Jack's laugh as he taught Titan to heel, Clara's smile as she praised Rosie's focus. The journals were a lifeline, a whisper of the life she'd lost, and she carried them to her room, her heart pounding with purpose. That night, under the beam of a flashlight, Lily pored over the pages. Titan, strong leader, responds to firm tone, Jack had written. Rosie, gentle, needs soft cues, Clara added. Each dog had a story, Jasper's stubborn streak, Daisy's playfulness, Storm's quiet intensity, Finn's quick mind and commands to match, hand signals, whistles, words Lily had once mimicked in the yard. She studied by moonlight, her lips moving silently as she memorized, her hands practicing the gestures until they flowed like water. A flick of her wrist for sit, a low hum for circle. She adapted them, her small stature shaping new variations the dogs understood instinctively. The next morning, Evelyn woke to a crash in the kitchen. She shuffled in, her back screaming with pain, to find Henry struggling with a bag of kibble, his hands too weak to lift it. I'll manage, he grunted, but Evelyn shook her head, her eyes on the yard where Lily sat with the dogs. We can't keep up, she said, her voice breaking. The pack needed exercise, discipline, things their aging bodies couldn't provide. She'd tried walking them once, her arthritis flaring with every step, and Henry's heart had raced dangerously after a block. They're all she has, Henry rasped, sinking into a chair. Evelyn nodded, tears brimming. Then she'll have to do it. Lily made her decision without a word. She rose at dawn, clipping the leashes to her belt, a concession to Evelyn's pleas, and stepped off the porch, the dogs falling into formation. Titan led, his stride steady, while Rosie brushed her side, Jasper and the others fanning out behind. She moved with quiet determination, her hands weaving the signals she'd honed, a wrist twist to halt, a whistle to turn. The pack responded flawlessly, their trust in her absolute, a bond forged in the attic's dusty glow. She took them past the dunes, then onto St. George Street, the cobblestones cool beneath her sneakers, as the town woke to her improbable march. The sight stopped traffic, literally. A delivery van braked hard, its driver gaping as Lily guided her pack past Sullivan's coffee shack. Frank dropped his broom, his grin wide. Well, hell, she's doing it alone now, he said, setting out water and a treat. Tourists whipped out phones, their voices a hum of awe. How does she control them? They're like soldiers. Lily didn't flinch, her focus on Titan as he scanned the street, his ears alert. She'd ventured beyond the side streets before, but this was different, a claim on the town itself, her confidence blooming from the journal's wisdom. Dorothy Evans watched from her window, her tea cold in her hand. She'd seen Lily that foggy morning with the truck, Titan's growl a warning she couldn't shake. Now alone, the girl seemed smaller, yet the dogs obeyed her with a precision that chilled Dorothy's spine. No child should have that power, she muttered, her pen scratching in her notebook. 6:47 a.m., unsupervised, 6 dogs, no incident. Yet. She'd heard Margaret's fears, felt the unease of her tea-hour allies, and the sight of Lily, tiny, silent, commanding, crystallized her resolve. "This can't go on," she said, her voice firm as she closed the blinds, the decision settling like a stone in her chest. Henry and Evelyn stood at their window, watching Lily return. The dogs sprawled in the yard, panting as she sat among them, her hands tracing their fur. She's managing," Evelyn said, her tone a mix of pride and worry. Henry nodded, his breath uneven. "Jack and Clara taught her well, even if she doesn't know it." The journals had unlocked something in Lily, a piece of her parents she carried in every gesture, every whistle. But the town's whispers reached them, too, Margaret's complaints, Dorothy's sharp gaze, and Evelyn's hands tightened. "They're watching her," she murmured, Henry's jaw clenched. "Let them watch." Lily didn't hear the growing storm. She sat with Titan, her fingers in his fur, her mind replaying the journal's lessons. The dogs pressed close, their warmth a shield against the world beyond the yard. She didn't know Dorothy's notebook was filling, didn't sense the eyes tracking her every move, but the dogs did. Storm's head lifted, Finn's ears twitched, and they stayed near, their loyalty a promise as the wind carried whispers of trouble closer still. The town hall on Cordova Street buzzed with restless energy, its wooden pews packed beyond capacity as the late October sun dipped below St. Augustine's skyline. The agenda read, "Leash Law Revisions." But everyone knew the real subject. Lily Harper and her 6 German shepherds. Dorothy Evans sat near the front, her notebook clutched like a weapon, her silver bun gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Across the aisle, Henry and Evelyn Harper gripped each other's hands, their faces pale with exhaustion and defiance. Lily wasn't there. Evelyn had insisted she stay home with the dogs, but her presence loomed over the room, a silent specter at the heart of a storm that had split St. Augustine in two. Mayor Louise Grayson banged her gavel, her voice strained as she called for order. "We're here to discuss public safety," she began, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air. "Let's keep this civil." But civility frayed fast. Betty Carter, the tattooed owner of Carter's Seafood Shack, strode to the microphone, rolling up her sleeves to reveal forearms etched with anchors and fish. "I've run my place on St. George for 15 years, she said, her voice booming. "Those dogs bring folks in. Tourists eat on my patio just to see 'em pass. They're better behaved than half the drunks I serve." Applause erupted from the back, where Frank Sullivan and a cluster of shopkeepers nodded vigorously. Dorothy rose next, her posture rigid, her tone clipped with the authority of decades commanding classrooms. "Safety isn't about profit," she countered, her eyes sweeping the crowd. 6 massive animals unleashed, controlled by a traumatized child who doesn't speak. It's a tragedy waiting to happen. What about the vulnerable, the elderly, the children? Margaret Brooks stood beside her, trembling, as she added, "My grandson's terrified since a dog bit him last year. Should he face those beasts on his way to school?" Equal applause thundered from the front, a wall of sound that matched the divide, splitting the room. Henry shifted in his seat, his breath uneven, his hand tightening on Evelyn's. He wanted to speak, to defend Lily, but his heart fluttered, a warning he couldn't ignore. Evelyn whispered, "Stay calm," her own hands aching as she watched the debate unfold. Officer Tom Rivera leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his notebook from Lily's walks tucked in his pocket. He'd told the precinct, "She's no threat." But Dorothy's petition, now with 27 signatures, had forced this reckoning. He caught Frank's eye, a silent nod of support, but the tide of voices drowned out reason. Betty fired back, her fists clenched. "You're fear-mongering, Dorothy. Those dogs don't bother a soul unless provoked, and even then they're disciplined. I'd trust 'em over most folks here." Dorothy's lips thinned. "Discipline doesn't stop instinct," she snapped. "One snap, one slip, and we'll all regret it." The room erupted again, shouts overlapping, some calling Lily a marvel, others a menace. A new voice cut through. "Doctor." Samuel Klein, a young veterinarian with wire-rimmed glasses, stepped forward, his awkward gait belying his quiet confidence. "I've watched her," he said, his tone measured. "The control she has, it's extraordinary. Those dogs are trained beyond anything I've seen." The crowd hushed, intrigued by the newcomer. Samuel adjusted his glasses, his hands steady despite the eyes on him. "German Shepherds are intelligent, loyal. Lily's tapped into that, adapted her parents' techniques. It's not danger, it's devotion." Dorothy scoffed. "Devotion doesn't negate risk." But Samuel's words lingered, a crack in her armor. Mayor Grayson banged her gavel again, her patience thinning. "Enough! We'll vote on the ordinance next week. For now, let's adjourn." The room emptied slowly, factions glaring across the aisle, the air thick with unresolved tension. Outside, Henry leaned on Evelyn as they shuffled to their car, the weight of the night pressing on his chest. "They don't see her," he rasped. "They don't see what those dogs mean." Evelyn nodded, her eyes on the darkening sky. "They will," she said, though doubt gnawed at her. At home, Lily sat in the yard, the dogs sprawled around her, oblivious to the storm brewing beyond the dunes. T-Teen's head rested in her lap, her fingers tracing his fur, a silent promise holding her steady as the town's divide widened. Dorothy walked home alone, her notebook heavy in her purse. She'd won no victory, but the fight wasn't over. She'd seen Jack Harper's spirit in Lily, too wild, too free, and it stirred a restlessness she couldn't name. The wind whispered through the oaks, carrying the echoes of a divided saint. Augustine, a prelude to the clash yet to come. Henry Harper stood in the kitchen, the afternoon sun slanting through the cracked blinds, a bag of kibble slipping from his trembling hands. His breath hitched, a sharp pain blooming at his chest as he staggered against the counter. The room spun, the edges blurring, and he clutched the edge of the sink, his knees buckling. In the living room, Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, the 6 German shepherds arrayed around her like a fortress of fur and muscle. Titan's ears shot up, his body tensing as he rose, a low whine escaping his throat. Before Evelyn could stir from her chair, he bolted to the kitchen, Lily scrambling after him, her red sneakers skidding on the floorboards. She found Henry slumped against the cabinets, his face gray, his breath's shallow gasps. Titan nudged him, insistent, then turned to Lily, his dark eyes urgent. She dropped to her knees, her small hands tugging Henry's arm, guiding him into the recovery position she'd seen Clara practice on a training dummy years ago. "Grandpa," she whispered, the first word she'd spoken to a human in months, her voice a fragile thread, lost in the chaos. Titan stood guard, his massive frame a barrier as Rosie and Jasper flanked the doorway, the others forming a perimeter, their instincts honed to protect. Evelyn shuffled in, her arthritis slowing her steps, a cry catching in her throat as she saw Henry. "Oh, Lord!" she gasped, fumbling for the phone. Lily stayed by his side, her hand steady on his shoulder, Titan's warmth anchoring her as she waited. The paramedics arrived fast, their boots loud on the porch, and Dr. Samuel Klein followed, summoned by a neighbor who'd seen the ambulance. He'd been stopping by lately, curious about Lily's skill, and now he stood in the doorway, his glasses fogging as he took in the scene. Henry on the floor, Lily silent again, the dogs poised like sentinels. "He's stable," a paramedic said, securing Henry to a stretcher. "Heart episode. Could have been worse if he'd stayed upright." Samuel knelt beside Lily, his voice soft. Titan knew, didn't he? She nodded, her eyes on her grandfather, and Samuel scribbled a note. "Cardiac alert behavior. Rare. Natural." "Some dogs sense it," he murmured to Evelyn, who clutched her swollen hands. "Changes in breathing, maybe body chemistry. He warned her." Evelyn's tears fell, her voice breaking. "They saved her after the crash. Now him. They always know." The paramedics wheeled Henry out, Evelyn trailing with a shawl around her shoulders. Lily stayed back, the dogs pressing close, her silence returning like a cloak. Samuel lingered, his curiosity deepening. "I'll check on them later," he told Evelyn, then turned to Lily. "You did good, kid." She didn't respond, her fingers in Titan's fur, but the flicker in her eyes said she'd heard. Word spread fast. Frank Sullivan heard it at his coffee shop, Betty Carter at her restaurant, and by evening, St. Augustine buzzed with the tale. The dog girl's pack had saved old Henry Harper. Dorothy Evans caught the story over tea with Margaret, her lips thinning as she stirred her cup. "One trick doesn't make 6 dogs safe," she said, her voice sharp. "If anything, it proves they're unpredictable." Margaret nodded, her fear unshaken, but others wavered. Frank told his customers, "That Titan's a hero," and Betty hung a "Support Lily" sign in her window, her loyalty firm. The divide deepened, Dorothy's resolve clashing with a growing tide of awe, her notebook filling with doubt she wouldn't voice. At the hospital, Henry rested, his color returning, Evelyn at his side. "She spoke," he rasped, his eyes wet. "Called me Grandpa." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart aching with hope and fear. "She's still in there," she said, echoing words from years past. Back home, Lily sat in the yard, the dogs around her, Titan's head in her lap. She didn't know the town's whispers had shifted, didn't sense the eyes watching her anew. But the dogs did. Rosie's ears twitched, Storm's gaze sharpened, and they stayed close, their instincts a shield as the storm loomed closer still. The first reporter arrived at dawn, a wiry man from the St. Augustine Record, his camera flashing as Lily led her pack past the dunes. The fog had lifted, but a heavier shadow settled over the Harper home as Dorothy Evans's petition, now bearing 32 signatures, leaked to the press. By noon, a van from a Jacksonville news station parked on the sandy lane, its crew jostling for shots of the weathered house where Henry and Evelyn Harper clung to their granddaughter's fragile world. Word of Titan's rescue of Henry had spread like wildfire, but Dorothy's sharp voice cut through the awe. one act doesn't erase the danger. Her words, quoted in a front-page story headlined, "The Dog Whisperer Girl, Miracle or Menace," ignited a storm that swept St. Augustine into the national spotlight. The article exploded online, hashtags like #DogWhispererGirl trending as videos of Lily's marches, snapped by tourists weeks ago, racked up millions of views. Cable news picked it up, a chipper host asking, "Is this child gifted or endangered?" while pundits debated leash laws and child welfare. Reporters camped at the end of the Harpers' driveway, their knocks unanswered, their shouts, "Just a quick word about the dogs," met with silence. Henry, still weak from his hospital stay, suffered heart palpitations from the stress, his hands trembling as he peered through the blinds. "They won't leave us be," he rasped, sinking into his armchair. Evelyn changed their phone number after a flood of calls, some supportive, others threatening, left her shaking over the kitchen sink. Lily felt the shift, though she couldn't name it. She stopped her morning walks, the dogs growing restless in the yard, their whines piercing the quiet. She took them out only at pre-dawn hours, her red sneakers silent on the sand as Titan led the pack through shadows, avoiding the prying eyes now fixed on her every move. The journals lay open on her bed, their pages a comfort she clung to, her hands tracing her parents' words as if they could shield her from the chaos beyond the dunes. Titan pressed close, his warmth a steady pulse, but even he seemed agitated, his ears twitching at every distant engine roar. Dorothy Evans stood at a makeshift press conference on her porch, her notebook in hand, her tone resolute. "This is about protection," she told the cluster of microphones, her silver bun catching the sunlight. "A child that age alone with 6 powerful animals, it's irresponsible. Her grandparents are overwhelmed, and the community deserves safety." Her allies, Margaret Brooks, Ellen from the library, nodded behind her, their faces grim. But cracks showed. Frank Sullivan scoffed from his coffee shop. "She's twistin' it," and Betty Carter hung a bigger "Support Lily" sign, her loyalty unshaken. The town's divide widened, whispers turning to shouts as St. Augustine wrestled with its own reflection. Officer Tom Rivera drove past the Harper house, his patrol car a quiet presence amid the media swarm. He'd refused to sign Dorothy's petition, telling his chief, "I've seen no violations, only a kid who's found a way to cope." But the pressure mounted, his logs couldn't stop the tide Dorothy had unleashed. Dr. Samuel Klein visited too, his glasses fogging as he slipped through the reporters to check on Henry. "They're hounding her," he told Evelyn, his voice low. "But Titan's alert, that's real. It's not just instinct, it's purpose." Evelyn nodded, her swollen hands folding a blanket. "They're all she has," she said, her eyes on Lily in the yard, surrounded by her restless pack. The storm broke fully when the Department of Children and Families responded. Caseworker Laura Bennett arrived with Officer Daniel Holt from Animal Control, their black sedan pulling into the driveway as reporters snapped photos. Laura's face was professionally neutral as she introduced herself, her tablet glowing with notes. "We're here to assess concerns about Lily's welfare and the dog's management," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of cameras. Henry invited them in, his voice shaking. "She's a special child. After her parents died, these dogs became her lifeline." Daniel eyed the pack warily, Titan's unwavering stare meeting his own. "Safety protocols must be followed," he said, trailing off as the dogs shifted, their formation tightening around Lily on the rug. Laura turned to Lily, her tone gentle. "Are you happy here, Lily?" The girl's eyes, hauntingly like Clara's, met hers briefly, then flicked away, no words forthcoming. The officials watched her silent choreography, her fingers signaling the dogs to their positions, their obedience a marvel that softened Daniel's frown. "We'll schedule a hearing," Laura announced, handing Evelyn a sheaf of papers. "A judge will decide next steps." As they left, Dorothy watched from down the block, her satisfaction a quiet hum. "Finally," she whispered, "she'll get help." Inside, Evelyn sank into a chair, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "They'll take her, or the dogs," she sobbed. Henry knelt beside Lily, his voice gentle. "We'll fight, sweetheart." The town buzzed as night fell, the media storm a relentless roar. Lily sat with Titan, her small hand buried in his fur, the journals a silent promise beside her. The dogs pressed close, their loyalty a shield as the world closed in, a prelude to the battle ahead. The hearing room at St. John's County Courthouse overflowed, its oak-paneled walls echoing with murmurs, as Judge Ellen Ramsey took the bench. Dorothy Evans sat with her attorney, a stern woman from Jacksonville, her notebook traded for a legal brief. Henry and Evelyn Harper flanked Lily at the respondents' table, their hands clasped, a local lawyer, James Torres, offering his services pro bono beside them. Lily's gaze stayed on her lap, her red sneakers scuffing the floor, the dogs left at home under a neighbor's watch. The air crackled with tension, St. Augustine's divide spilling into the courtroom as reporters lined the back, pencils poised for the next headline. Judge Ramsey's gavel fell, her no-nonsense tone cutting through the noise. "This is about Lily Harper's welfare," she said, her eyes sharp. "Let's hear the facts." Laura Bennett presented first, her tablet glowing as she summarized the investigation. Titan's cardiac alert, Lily's silence, the dog's discipline. "Experts disagree," she noted, her voice steady. "Some see a therapeutic bond, others a safety risk." Dr. Samuel Klein took the stand, his glasses slipping as he spoke. "Lily's adapted her parents' techniques, created her own." Titan's alert saved Henry Harper. Breaking this bond could harm her more than help. His passion stirred the room, a ripple of nods from Frank and Betty in the gallery. Dorothy's attorney cross-examined, her tone icy. "You're young, Dr. Klein. How many cases like this have you seen? Isn't this emotional dependence a crutch?" Samuel held firm. "It's a bridge, not a crutch. Rare, but documented." Dorothy testified next, her voice carrying decades of authority. "I've seen children in crisis," she said, her eyes on Lily. "Compassion can't blind us to danger. 6 dogs, a silent child. It's unstable." She presented photos of shepherd attacks from the internet, her argument methodical, though her hands trembled slightly, a crack in her resolve she wouldn't name. The hearing stretched into hours, the air growing heavy. Then chaos erupted. Titan burst through the doors, escaping his minder, his paws thundering down the aisle. Gasps filled the room as he reached Lily, nudging her hand, then turned to Henry, whining insistently. Samuel stood. "He's alerting. Henry's in distress." Paramedics rushed in, confirming Henry's racing pulse, and Judge Ramsey ordered a recess, her composure shaken. "Clear the room," she directed, her voice firm. "Lily, Dr. Klein, my chambers, now." In the quiet of her office, Lily sat rigid in a leather chair, Titan at her feet, her eyes on the floor. Samuel spoke softly, pulling photos from his pocket, candid shots of her with the dogs. "You've trained them beautifully," he said. "Your parents would be proud." Her fingers brushed a picture of Titan, a spark flickering in her gaze. Judge Ramsey sat beside her, her tone gentle. I know this is hard, Lily. Everyone's deciding for you. I want to hear what you want, words or not. After a long silence, Lily took a notepad, her pen scratching. Please don't take my dogs away. They keep the nightmares from coming back. Samuel blinked. You write well. She scribbled again. I can read too. Mom and Dad taught me. Judge Ramsey leaned in. Why don't you speak? Lily wrote, her hand steady. Words got stuck after the crash. I try, but they won't come out. It scares Grandma and Grandpa. The judge nodded, her face softening. We'll go back soon. I need the court to hear you, somehow. Lily wrote one last line. Will Titan stay? Samuel promised, I'll make sure. Back in the courtroom, Henry returned, stabilized, Titan at Lily's side. Judge Ramsey addressed the room. Lily shared her wishes through writing. She values these dogs deeply. Dorothy's attorney objected. Ex parte with a minor is irregular. Ramsey's gaze hardened. This court prioritizes the child's best interest. Her voice matters. Lily stood then, her hand on Titan, her voice a whisper. They're not just pets. They keep me safe. The room stilled, her words a fragile gift after years of silence, a prelude to the truths, yet to unfold. The judge's chambers smelled of old leather and polished wood, a quiet refuge from the chaos of the St. John's County Courthouse. Judge Ellen Ramsey sat across from Lily Harper, her stern features softened by the late afternoon light, filtering through the blinds. Dr. Samuel Klein stood nearby, his glasses fogged from the tension, holding the notepad where Lily had scrawled her plea. Please don't take my dogs away. They keep the nightmares from coming back. Titan lay at her feet, his massive head resting on her red sneakers, his dark eyes watchful. The air held a fragile stillness, as if the room itself waited for the child to unravel the silence that had defined her for 2 years. Samuel adjusted his glasses, his voice gentle. You write like you've been doing it a while, Lily. She nodded, her small hand taking the pen again, her words forming with careful precision. Mom and Dad taught me early. I can read their journals. Judge Ramsey leaned forward, her tone soft but probing. Why don't you speak, Lily? Is it too hard? Lily's pen paused, her eyes flickering to Titan, then back to the page. Words got stuck after I saw the crash. I try, but they won't come out. It scares Grandma and Grandpa when I try too hard. The judge's breath caught, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. You saw it. Lily's hand trembled, the pen scratching faster now. I was in the back seat. The truck hit us. It was raining so hard. Samuel's eyes widened and Judge Ramsey's composure faltered, her voice barely above a whisper. You were there? Lily nodded, her gaze dropping to Titan, her fingers tightening in his fur. Titan pulled me out before the fire. I saw Mom and Dad. They didn't move. The words landed like stones, heavy with the truth no one had known. Not Henry, not Evelyn, not the police who'd found her on the roadside, unharmed but mute. Samuel knelt beside her, his voice thick. You never told anyone. She shook her head, her silence a vault she'd locked until now. Back in the courtroom, the gallery buzzed as Judge Ramsey resumed the hearing. Henry stabilized and seated beside Evelyn, his face pale but resolute. Titan stayed at Lily's side, a living testament to her words. During the recess, Ramsey announced, her tone firm. Lily shared critical information through writings and speech. She was in the crash that killed her parents. Titan saved her life. A collective gasp rippled through the room, reporters scribbling furiously. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "She never told us," she whispered to Henry, her voice breaking. "We thought she was with a sitter." Henry's hand shook as he gripped hers, his eyes on Lily, a mix of awe and anguish in his gaze. Dorothy Evans sat rigid, her attorney tugging at her sleeve, but her focus was on Lily. The girl stood, her small frame trembling, her hand on Titan's back as if drawing strength from him. "They're not just pets," she said, her voice a halting whisper, each word a battle won. "They keep me safe. Max, Titan, pulled me out. All the dogs save me every day. From the dreams, the pictures in my head." Her voice cracked, a sob swallowed as she pressed on. "Please don't take them away. They're the only part of Mom and Dad I have left." The courtroom fell silent, her plea a fragile thread weaving through the tension, binding every heart to her pain. Dorothy rose slowly, her posture softening, her eyes meeting Lily's for the first time, not as a threat, but as a person. "Your Honor," she began, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "I believed she was in danger. I still think safeguards are needed, but after this—" She paused, her hands clasping, a struggle playing out in her lined face. "I can't advocate removing these dogs. Not now." Her attorney hissed a protest, but Dorothy waved her off. "I withdraw my petition, but I ask for oversight, for her safety, her recovery." The room exhaled, a shift palpable as her words bridged a chasm widened by months of strife. Judge Ramsey nodded, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "Given today's testimony, I'm prepared to rule. This court recognizes no perfect solutions in trauma cases. But Lily's bond with these dogs is a path to healing. I order a 6-month monitoring period. Child welfare and animal behavior specialists will oversee, with Dr. Klein developing a therapeutic program. The dogs stay, with safety protocols and support for the Harpers." She concluded, her voice steady. "Our duty is to nurture her path while ensuring protection. That's my intent today." The gavel fell, a final note in a symphony of conflict and revelation. As the room emptied, Lily sat between Henry and Evelyn, Titan at her feet, her silence returning, not of trauma now, but of choice. Reporters rushed to file stories, spectators debated the ruling, but she remained untouched by the clamor, her hand on Titan's head, whispering words only he could hear. Dorothy lingered, her notebook forgotten, her eyes on the girl she'd fought to save, or perhaps to silence. Knowing the truth she carried was heavier still, a burden yet to break free. The public garden near Anastasia Boulevard bloomed with late fall color, its paths winding past live oaks, and a small pond glinting in the sun. Lily walked her pack there one warm Tuesday. Her red sneakers scuffing the gravel, Titan leading with his steady stride. Dr. Samuel Klein trailed her, clipboard in hand, documenting her signals for his budding therapeutic program. The dogs moved in harmony, Rosie at her side, Jasper scanning ahead, drawing smiles from tourists snapping photos. Lily paused by the pond, her hand on Titan's fur, when Dorothy Evans emerged from the crowd, her arm in a cast, her normally perfect posture stooped under an invisible weight. "Emma, Lily," she corrected, her voice soft. "May I speak with you?" Samuel tensed, stepping closer, but Lily gave a slight nod, positioning Titan between them, the dogs tightening their formation. Dorothy stopped at a respectful distance, her good hand clutching a shopping bag. "I owe you an apology," she began, her tone lacking its usual edge. "I thought I was protecting you, trying to take your dogs. I was wrong." She paused, her eyes flickering with something raw. "But there's more. A reason I've been too ashamed to face. The night your parents died, it was my car that ran the red light. The words hung heavy, a confession that stilled the air, Lily's eyes widening as the dog shifted, sensing her shock. It was raining, Dorothy continued, her voice a whisper now, tears tracing her lined face. I was arguing with my husband on the phone, distracted. I'd had 2 glasses of wine at lunch, not enough to fail a test, but enough I shouldn't have driven. I didn't see the light change until it was too late. She swallowed hard, her casted arm trembling. The police called it an accident. Weather, visibility, no charges. But I knew. I've known every day since. Samuel moved to intervene, but Lily's hand on his arm stopped him, her pale face fixed on Dorothy with an intensity beyond her years. When I saw you with those dogs, Dorothy pressed on, walking past my house every morning, it was a haunting. The guilt I'd buried came back. I told myself you weren't safe, that they were dangerous, anything to justify meddling, to feel I was balancing what I'd done. But hearing you in court, seeing your courage, I wasn't protecting you. I was hiding from myself. Lily spoke then, her voice small but clear. You hurt my mom and dad. Dorothy nodded, tears falling faster. Yes, and I can't undo it. I don't expect forgiveness. The dogs knew your smell, Lily added, a revelation that struck like lightning. They got nervous near your house, remembered from the crash. Dorothy shrank, her shoulders curving inward, the final weight of her responsibility crushing her resolve. I'm so sorry, Lily, she choked out. I've wanted to tell you, but cowardice kept me quiet. A cyclist sped around the corner, startling pigeons into flight, their wings a sudden chaos behind Lily. She jumped, her breath catching, and Titan lunged forward with a warning bark, not attacking but defending as Dorothy stepped closer, perhaps to steady herself. Dorothy stumbled, her balance lost, and fell backward onto the path, her casted arm hitting the gravel with a sickening crack. Samuel shouted a command, "Back, Titan!" from Lily's signals, and the dog retreated, but the damage was done. Dorothy lay clutching her arm, gasping. He didn't bite. I just fell. A park visitor called 911, yelling about a dog attack, and within minutes police and paramedics swarmed the scene. Officer Tom Rivera approached, his face grim. I'm sorry, Lily, but I have to take Titan to animal control until we sort this. Protocol. Lily's face crumpled, her voice breaking free. No. He was protecting me. Please. Dorothy, on a stretcher, insisted. It wasn't his fault. I fell. Note that. But Tom shook his head, attaching a lead to Titan's collar. It's temporary, I promise. Lily collapsed into Samuel's arms, sobbing as Titan was led away. The remaining dogs whining in distress, their pack fractured. Dorothy watched, her tears no longer just for herself. A dark moment that should test the fragile threads of redemption she'd begun to weave. The sun rose over St. Augustine, casting a golden glow across the dunes near the Harper home, its rays piercing the early November chill. Lily sat motionless on the porch, her red sneakers dangling above the weathered boards. 5 German shepherds sprawled around her, Titan's absence a gaping wound in their circle. She hadn't spoken since his removal to animal control the day before, her silence a retreat to the familiar refuge of grief. Evelyn moved slowly behind her, her swollen hands clutching a mug of tea, her eyes red from a sleepless night. Henry paced the living room, his breath uneven, dialing every official he could reach. Animal control, the mayor's office, his voice hoarse with desperation. It's a miscarriage of justice, he rasped, slamming the phone down as another call went unanswered. Dr. Samuel Klein arrived early. his glasses fogged from the damp air, his face etched with determination. He'd spent the night at the animal control facility, ensuring Titan's care, and now crouched before Lily, meeting her downcast eyes. "He's okay," he said softly. "Calm, waiting for you. Officer Tom's pushing the review. Dorothy's statement helps." Lily's fingers twitched in Rosie's fur, a flicker of hope in her stillness, but her silence held firm. Evelyn joined them, her voice trembling. "She won't eat, won't move. Losing him, it's like losing Jack and Clara all over again." Samuel nodded, his resolve hardening. "We'll get him back. I promise." The promise took shape by mid-morning when Betty Carter burst through the door, her tattooed arms cradling a USB drive. "You need to see this," she said, breathless, her eyes wide with urgency. "My restaurant's cameras, part of the harbor project. They caught something weeks ago." Henry and Evelyn gathered around the ancient desktop, its screen flickering to life as Betty loaded the footage. Dated 6 weeks before the hearing, it showed the public garden at 5:47 a.m. Lily entering alone with Titan. She knelt by the drained pond, reaching for a toy boat, then slipped, tumbling headfirst into the shallow, slippery water. Her small body thrashed, unable to find footing until Titan leaped in, pushing her to the surface and boosting her onto the rim. She coughed, clinging to him, then limped away, shaken but alive. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling. "She came home wet that day, said it was a puddle. If he hadn't—" Her voice broke, and Henry gripped her shoulder, his own eyes wet. Samuel studied the frozen frame, Titan's sodden fur gleaming. "This proves it," he said, his voice firm. "He's not just trained, he's her protector, acting on his own to save her." Betty handed him a duplicate drive. "I'll testify if you need me. That dog's a hero." Word spread fast. Frank Sullivan heard it at his coffee shop. Neighbors whispered it over fences. And by noon, a crowd gathered. Outside animal control, signs reading "Free Titan" and "Heroes Belong Home," waving in the breeze. Dorothy Evans arrived at the Harper home unannounced, her arm freshly casted, her face resolute despite the pain. She bypassed the door, approaching Lily on the porch, stopping at a safe distance as the dogs tensed. "Lily," she said, her voice soft, "I saw the pond video. Titan saved you, risked himself without hesitation. It made me see how wrong I've been." She paused, her good hand withdrawing an envelope. "I've been to the police, given a full statement about the crash, everything. I resigned from my community roles. This—" She placed the envelope on the step. "Takes responsibility for yesterday. It clears Titan, calls him a service animal. My attorney sent it to the judge." Lily studied her, her voice emerging small but steady. "Why now?" Dorothy's shoulders sagged. "Because I failed you, then and since. I can't undo your parents' deaths, but I can stop you losing him." Before she could say more, Officer Tom Rivera's cruiser pulled up, Titan bounding from the back, his tail whipping the air. "Special delivery," Tom called, grinning as he released the leash. Lily cried out, a sound of pure joy, racing down the steps to collide with Titan in a tangle of arms and fur, whispering words only he could hear. The other dogs surged forward, their pack whole again, their whines a chorus of relief. Dorothy watched, tears streaming, not of self-pity now, but of a fragile hope she hadn't earned. She turned away, but Evelyn's voice stopped her. "Wait." Dorothy hesitated, meeting her gaze. "You hurt us, more than you know, but this—" She gestured to Lily and Titan. "It's a start." Dorothy nodded, a silent vow in her eyes, then left. her steps heavy but purposeful. Judge Ellen Ramsey acted swiftly, amending her ruling that afternoon. Titan and the pack were classified as service animals, a legal precedent set with ongoing support mandated for the Harpers. Dorothy's confession, though beyond prosecution, shifted St. Augustine's tide, some decrying her, others praising her belated courage. Lily emerged from her silence in the weeks that followed, her voice halting but growing. She spoke short sentences at home. Titan's hungry. Grandma, look. Each word a victory Evelyn treasured. The court broke something open, she told Samuel during a monitoring visit, her eyes bright. She's not afraid of words anymore. Samuel's program expanded, Lily helping him refine it with her signals. The journals a guide as they built Paws for healing for other traumatized kids. She started school part-time, Titan at her side, his service vest a badge of their bond. Her classmates awed as she explained, "He helps me breathe when I'm scared." Dorothy withdrew from public life, selling her Victorian home for a modest apartment near the community center, where she volunteered quietly. A winter storm tested her anew, stranding the Harpers when their car failed in the cold. She arrived with a rented SUV, loading Henry, Evelyn, Lily, and the dogs into its warmth, driving them to a shelter. 3 days together forged a tentative peace. Not absolution, but a space for healing. Henry softened, Evelyn offered a nod, and Lily met her eyes once, a silent acknowledgement of a debt repaid. On the crash's anniversary, St. Augustine held Canine Companionship Day in the public garden, a bronze plaque unveiled near the pond. For Lily Harper and her dogs, a bond of loyalty and healing. Mayor Grayson handed Lily a certificate, her voice clear as she spoke to the crowd, Titan beside her. Mom and Dad said dogs and people help each other. I think they'd be happy now. She smiled, a child's joy breaking through her solemnity, the dogs wagging their tails as if they understood. Henry and Evelyn embraced her, tears glistening, and Dorothy stood nearby, her presence a quiet testament to a redemption hard-earned. As the crowd applauded, the sun dipped low, painting the garden in hues of amber and rose. Lily led her pack home, her steps light, the dogs fanning out around her, a family rebuilt from loss. The town watched, no longer divided, but united in a story of courage, loyalty, and grace. In the twilight, the omniscient voice lingered, reflecting for those who'd walk this journey. Healing comes in unexpected forms. Second chances bloom from truth, and the bonds that guide us through darkness, human or canine, define us most. For Lily, her dogs, and St. Augustine, a new dawn had broken, steady and sure. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.